Welcome to the Up in Your Family Business podcast, where we dive into the heart of family business with intimate interviews, expert insights, inspirational stories, valuable resources, and practical tips to help grow your family business. Guest for today's Up in Your Family Business podcast is Greg Bramwell, a relationship manager for Star Financial Bank, which is headquartered in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Greg's primary territory is Madison County, but through referrals and other types of introductions, he has clients throughout Central and East Central Indiana. In addition to his commitment to his clients' needs and growth, he contributes his time to the community, right? I think, Heart of Indiana United Way Board of Directors.
Yep.
Are you still doing that?
Yes, I've been on that board for 7 years.
8 years.
Is it 8 years?
Yes, it's 8 years.
It's been a long time. I know that.
In all fairness, I have your bio in front of me. So
I knew it was 7 or 8.
So when it comes to your bio, I might know you better than you do at this very moment. So give yourself some credit. It's been 8 years.
8 years, wow.
Also, you've been a committee member on Alternatives of Madison County, 5 years.
Yep.
Still on that right now?
Yep.
Wow.
Helped out with that every year, yep.
When I was looking at these, I'm like, are you doing all these still, or just you did this one?
The Alternatives is something we help out usually in the spring, so it's not
awesome.
a huge time commitment, but it's a good organization, so glad to help.
And a prior board of directors member of the Anderson Noon Rotary Club. You did that for 3 years.
Yep, I did that, yep.
Okay, very cool. I would be remiss not to point out that Greg is also an alum of Indiana State University.
Yep, proud alumni.
I know you are. We had some fun conversations when the NIT was going on.
Yes.
And the Sycamores were making their way to the finals.
Yep.
I must point out, I'm not trying to kiss up or anything, but man, they should have won that game.
They should have won that game. They were up 7 with 2:29 to go. I was there and lived every second of it.
I felt pretty confident that Seton. I was not surprised with the final. When the NIT started, I felt the final would be Indiana State and Seton Hall. They were the two most dominant teams in that tournament.
Yeah.
So, and I hate to see the way the team's been broken. Oh, it's just painful.
Well, yeah, it's a whole other subject. But the way college basketball landscape with the NIT money, the smaller, the Ball States, Indiana States, Evansvilles, it's one and done. If you have a good player, they're siphoned off the highest bidder, unfortunately.
It's painful.
Yeah.
It's painful. Yeah, that's a whole other subject. We'll have you come in again and
I can talk about that all day.
Yeah,
probably.
I know you can. It's awesome. But I love the enthusiasm, and I know you had a lot of fun doing that.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for being here.
Sure.
As soon as I heard about your knowledge of and experience with fraud, that really stood out to me. I'm like, ooh, that would be a really, really good podcast topic. Yeah. We hear about fraud. We kind of know what it means, but it's not something. I mean, obviously you can Google it and learn about it, but there's so much out there.
Yeah.
And ironically, even though there's so much out there and people are aware of it, it's not really discussed enough. It's not explored enough, and I don't think people fully understand how common it is, how vast it is, how quickly it's growing, and honestly, I'm not sure that a lot of people know how to prevent it, what to do about it. So I think that's worth exploring. So I'm really glad you're here. Thank you for setting an hour of your time aside to do this.
I appreciate the invitation.
Yes. So with that said, here's the title of today's podcast: Unmasking Deception, Understanding, Avoiding, and Recovering from Business Fraud. In this insightful episode, Greg and I, as I kind of mentioned just a few seconds ago, we'll explore business fraud and the many facets of fraudulent activities that target businesses. We will thoroughly examine business fraud, from understanding and preventing it to effective recovery and future-proofing strategies. This episode is essential for business owners, managers, and anyone committed to protecting their company from fraud. So let's dive in. Before I get to my first question, and I kind of mentioned this to you before we got started, I did some research and I was trying to learn a little bit more about fraud before we talked. And I was just blown away and overwhelmed with how much there is out there. I mean, you have to really be diligent and really be looking for things that can sneak up on you real quickly.
Right.
So I found an article that talked about the most common types of fraud, and the list was 12.
Okay.
12. And that was the most common. That's not the complete list.
Sure.
So I just want to read these off so the people in the audience can be like, oh, yeah, I recognize that.
Yeah.
So identity theft, of course,
Sure.
and there's a lot that goes into that.
Yeah.
Payment fraud, ACH fraud, account takeover fraud, advance fee fraud, credit card fraud, investment fraud, consumer fraud, fraudulent charities, return fraud, chargeback fraud, cybercrime, and wire transfer fraud.
Yep.
And fraud's an interesting word because when you think of fraud, you think of something internal, like someone has done something illegal internally, and that
Certainly does happen.
And you might touch on that a little bit.
Yeah.
But fraud also, and this is what I was learning, is we hear the word scam, fraud, and I think that's where it gets a little confusing between fraud and scams. They're so closely tied. But fraud is way more extensive than just someone internally did some kind of illegal booking on, they tampered with the books.
Yeah.
That's what I always thought is fraud.
Yeah.
But there's so much more to it. It hits you personally and it hits you in business. And the thing that's interesting is a lot of family business owners, they are personal, like they are the business, right? You have a lot of people that the liability falls on them. So if something happens to the business, it's probably happening to the owners, which then trickles down into the whole, everyone gets affected by it.
Well, here's what I see, and I've seen examples of this with these family-owned businesses, right? That they're smaller companies, and the owners want to focus on growing the business. One thing that they don't want to spend a lot of time on is the books, right? So they have a trusted friend, maybe a family member, but someone that they trust to do the books. And in my opinion, sometimes these owners give too much ownership of the books and the finances and the checkbooks and things like that to these individuals, so they don't double check. There's an old saying, trust but verify. I think a lot of owners have been burned on the past where you don't really know that person, what's going on with that person. I've seen scenarios where those individuals may have like gambling issues, right? And then they start writing a couple checks to a spouse or a boyfriend, girlfriend, and that one got through, and have taken thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years, right? Stealing money from businesses because the owner isn't diligent in checking. They're just trusting that individual. So I think it's very important that owners keep an eye on the books, because that is what's going to keep the business running, right? I know you're chasing business, your customer satisfaction, you're busy doing that, and the books aren't fun.
They're not.
Books are not fun. You're a business owner yourself, right? But owning that and knowing your books, right? When you're working with your banker, right? Every bank you work with, if you have any type of lending relationship, the bank is depending on good internal numbers, like QuickBooks, your balance sheet, your income statement, and they want those to be accurate. Like we see so many of those that are, a lot of times the information on those aren't worth the numbers that is printed, the paper is printed on, because it's not accurate. It doesn't line up with the tax returns whatsoever. So sometimes just keeping an eye on that is one of my best advices to small business owners, is that focus on that. Don't just blindly turn that over to someone that you trust, because I've seen a lot of people get burned on that.
Yeah, so that in terms of internal fraud, so oftentimes that stuff might be uncovered or discovered. I'm not sure what the right word is there. When they're applying for a loan, and maybe you guys are looking through other financials, or of course a CPA. But sometimes the CPA is the one. I'm not bad mouthing CPAs, but sometimes CPAs, if they're not watched closely, they can do that too.
Right.
Luckily, I have a CPA that I really trust. So there are a lot of different types of fraud. We're not going to cover all these today.
Yeah.
And we're not making the assumption that, though you're well versed in fraud, that you are an expert in all these types of fraud. So I wanted to start out by just mentioning there's a lot. So be aware. But we'll just go ahead and focus on today. We'll focus on having a conversation around what you've seen, what you've experienced, what you've learned, and those types of things. So we'll keep the discussion to what's in your world, and that's fine. So of all those types of, you mentioned about the internal, in terms of all those types of fraud, what are the most common types that you're seeing businesses endure?
What I've noticed is like check and ACH fraud are the
check and ACH,
two ones that my clients have experienced the most. And another thing that business owners really aren't versed on is they think the FDIC insurance covers fraud. It does not.
Oh.
So they think, the FDIC will cover if I have any losses. It will not. And a lot of times the bank will not cover that. It's not the bank's responsibility, right? Sometimes a bank will eat that loss if the relationship is worth it, but banks are kind of turning away from that. In fact, I know most I know 3 different banks that I have friends that work at banks. They are sending letters out this summer to clients advising them that if you have fraud, right, each bank has a product called Positive Pay. I think you and I have talked in the past about Positive Pay. The banks have Check Positive Pay and ACH Positive Pay. It's a service, so it costs a fee, right? Some people don't want to like that word fee, but it is a fee-related product that banks offer. Let's just talk about Check Positive Pay. So it's a product through your online banking. It's Excel-based, so you as a business owner, you input all the checks that you write each day, right? So if you write 10 checks a day or write 50 checks a day, you upload those checks into your Positive Pay, which is the check number, who it's made payable to, the date, the amount. So that gets uploaded through the online banking. So the bank has that information. So when checks are presented to the bank in the future,
they match them?
They match them. It cross-references. And essentially the Positive Pay is pre-authorized checks that you're saying, yeah, these are checks that I have written, I authorize, right? So,
that's interesting.
So, and the checks that are on the Positive Pay file get paid. Now, we're all human. We make errors. And maybe we don't upload all the checks. So just if a check is presented that isn't on that Positive Pay file, the bank will notify the owner and say, hey, we got this check for $5,000 made payable to ABC Company. Should we pay it or reject it? So at that point, then the owner says, oh, yeah, it's valid or it's not valid, right? So that's how you protect yourself with the check fraud. So
that's neat.
So talking about check fraud, what I've noticed, there's different types of check fraud. So I think you've heard of the term whitewashing checks. There's chemicals out there. So if someone intercepts a check, there's chemicals out there that can lift the ink off the check that doesn't impact the
doesn't smear
lines.
it. Doesn't, get out of here.
I wish I was out of here, but I'm not. So it lifts the ink off the check, and then the criminal will just write their name, change the dollar amount, and present that check and get funds stolen that way.
So the question is, that technology that's used for that, was that how the technology was originally created?
I doubt it.
Yeah, I mean, like, what are they out there? Hey, if you go and do check fraud, buy our product,
Right. You find that on Amazon. I don't know. I don't know the chemical. I don't know really much about it. I just know that it's out there and it happens, right? So your Positive Pay would protect that because the payee wouldn't match, right? Typically the dollar amount, they're probably going to increase the dollar amount. I'm guessing if you're going to go through the steps of stealing money, you're going to probably go all the way, I would imagine. So
so they can change the dollar amount, they can change the payee, the whole shebang.
Right. So
wow,
the Positive Pay would protect you. That would come up flagged.
That's really cool.
Right. So that's one way to protect you on that type of fraud.
Is that a technology that's only offered through Star?
No, every bank should have that.
Okay. Yeah. Positive Pay.
Yeah. So I talk about fraud. You and we talk about fraud a lot, right? That's why I'm sitting here today.
That's right.
But, whenever I meet with a potential new client, I love to do loans. I love to get deposit accounts at the bank. But the first thing I always talk about is fraud. I'm like, what are you doing to protect yourself from fraud? We're here in Central Indiana, and there's an old saying. I think I've told this to you before, but the ground in Indiana has a lot of moisture in it. So we have issues with termites in Indiana for homeowners. And there's an old saying that if you live in Central Indiana and if you either have a house that's either had termites or you probably will have termites. And
cockroaches.
Or cockroaches, right? Or the little bitty ants in the spring. But the issue is, I think that's the same holds true for a business. You're either a business that's had fraud or will encounter fraud. I have no doubt. It's just increasing so much over the past 3 years. It's unbelievable, the amount of fraud, and a lot of this is coming from overseas. It's just not a United States issue. I would say most of this fraud is done outside of the country. So I think it's very important that businesses, it's just like anything, it's just an expense like anything else. I can't stress how important enough to get the Positive Pay. To me, it just lets you rest at night. If you're a business owner, I would have some peace knowing that I'm doing everything I can to protect myself. So another thing on the check fraud that we see, you got to think about a check. Everything on the check has everything they need to steal money, right? Has the bank, has the routing number, account number on there. So we also see scenarios where banks or someone will steal checks, right? They could when they steal a check, they have everything they need. If they don't use whitewashing on that particular check, they can use the information on there and make new checks, right? So they can make checks out of that looks like your regular checks that you have, or they could do a cashier's check, right? They can do all kinds.
So they can create checks that they can then use.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Right. So they can do that, and we see that all the time as well, where that's not the person's, it's not that business's check, but it's some other check that was the criminal created, right? Because it has everything on there, and with the computer software and stuff, and the nice printers, they can create checks that looks just like a bank check.
So here's the question. So how, I understand, checks can be, I'm assuming this is through checks that are mailed, like physical checks, right?
Right.
So how in the world are these people getting a hold of these checks?
Well, it could be a situation where you're sending a check to like Comcast or the gas company or wherever. So someone at that entity, right, the business, they could have a bad apple there, and they could, have cell phones. They could take a picture of the check as they're doing their regular job. They could take a picture of your check, have everything on there. They could go home and get on the computer and make checks. So just you're sending your electric bill out. So one thing's like if you don't do positive pay, things you can do to protect yourself is limit the number of checks you write. Okay, so with every bank, online banking, you can do bill pay, right? When you do bill pay, the bank sends a check out on your behalf, and it's on the bank's check, not your check.
And if you're on bill pay, then does that put the burden back on the bank then?
Right. So the bank has positive pay on our checks, right? Star Financial, we're probably our biggest client on positive pay. We have it ourselves, right, on our own checks. So when you do bill pay, that the bank will send a check out on their check with their account number, routing number, stuff. It doesn't have your information. So if you want to, when I look at reports on my clients, and I just kind of see, it shows how many checks they write a month, and when I see those numbers in the hundreds, that every time you write a check, it's out there. That's just an opportunity that you could expose yourself to fraud. So if you're writing hundreds of checks a month, you absolutely should do positive pay, no questions about it, right?
How long has positive pay been around? Just roughly.
I've been in banking
because I've never till today. I never heard of it.
Well, you're probably banking at the wrong bank.
Oh wow!
Because I when I told you a minute ago that when I talk to prospects, I lead with fraud, and I'm telling you, 90% of the time, the business owner doesn't know anything about positive pay. They don't know anything about fraud protection.
Fraud protection. Yeah. So, do you find a lot of your clients when you so what's the response you get from your clients? Because as you know, as human beings, we tend to, I'm guilty of it. We tend to take a, it won't happen to me type mentality, right? Like, So, what's the response you get when you first had the discussion about fraud? What is the response most of your clients initially have? Are they all in, or are they like,
It's a mixed bag.
I'm not worried about it.
It's a mixed bag. I have some people that get scared immediately and they want it, and I'm not. Yes, I need to make you aware. My intent is not to scare you, but you need to be aware as a business owner. You have to make an informed decision. I talked to a client of mine who's actually a good friend of mine as well. So I'm kind of going through the process now of calling my clients and talking about them, the ones that don't have positive pay. Called a good friend of mine a couple of weeks ago, said, hey, how's it going? And I talked about how business was going and talked about the fraud. I'm like, he said, he writes a lot of checks. I said, talked about positive pay, didn't seem that interested in it. And I'm like, well, another thing we need to talk about is, okay, if you don't have positive pay and you encounter fraud, a lot of times within 24 hours, if you notify your bank, a lot of times the bank can work with that other bank and get the funds back. It's usually like a 24-hour window. If it exceeds that, right? So I asked my client, my friend, I'm like, okay, you don't have positive pay, don't sound like you're interested in it. I said, how often do you check your online banking? He says, well, I never check it, Greg. I'm like, that I rolled my eyes and I got scared for him.
What does that mean by I never check it? What does that mean?
He says he never checks his online. I say, like, if you're a business owner, I would check your online banking.
He doesn't check like what's going in and out. He just.
I guess not. That's
okay.
What he doesn't. I said I would check that multiple times a day.
I do that personally. Every 2 weeks, I check all my credit cards, accounts, all my banking. I look to see if everything. I'm old school.
Yeah.
I keep all my receipts, and I make sure that nothing's happening.
Yeah, it's like eye opening. This guy's been in business a long time, and I'm like, okay, if you don't want positive pay, at least check your online banking. Promise me you'll check it multiple times a day. And here's a key point too, right? If you're a business owner, we're here talking about fraud. I'm not here trying to promote myself, but if you're a business owner, if you don't have a banker. And I'm not talking about the bank manager where you make your deposits and stuff like that, because they're not on the commercial side of the bank, right? Mm-hmm. I'm on the commercial side of the bank. It's so critical that you have to have a commercial contact that you can contact after hours even. My clients have an example. This was a check fraud scenario maybe about a year ago, right? I see you at Planet Fitness quite a bit, right? So it was in the evening, probably 6 o'clock in the evening. I was working out, and a client called me and popped up on the phone, and he doesn't call me often, so I picked it up. He's like, Greg, I've noticed 3 checks on my online banking that I didn't authorize.
3?
3.
Wow.
I think it was $4,000 roughly.
Still?
So I said, all right. I said, give me the check numbers, the amounts, and I said, let me see what I can do. So Star Bank, we're a smaller community bank. I had the cell number of the guy in our fraud department up in Fort Wayne. So I got off the phone with my client. I call our head of the fraud department, David Greenwood, up in Fort Wayne. He was driving home from work. He took my call, told him about the scenario. He said, yeah, when I get back home, I'll look into that. So he called me about a half hour later, and he had already set those checks to return, not to pay them. So I was able to contact my client that evening by 7:30.
Because he got on it quickly.
Because he had someone to contact. So if you're banking at Chase, PNC, big banks, right? If you don't have a go-to person, if you don't have the cell number of a banker that you can contact after hours,
that 24 window can close quickly.
Then you're going to call an 800 number, someone halfway across the country, right, that doesn't have a contact in the fraud department, and it just. There's a good example of being able to bank locally, bank with the people and someone that can help you if you have a problem, right? Everything's fine until you have a problem, right? Who you going to call? Sure, right? So when you go in the branch, everyone's nice to you at every branch. They should be, right? It's their job, right? But can they help you in a scenario after hours? I get calls weekends and evenings. My wife isn't real happy about it typically, but it's what I do, right? So I'm there for the clients. There's a lot of good bankers at all banks that you need to have that relationship. I guess I can't stress that. Like you mentioned before, you have a good CPA you trust. I think it's important to have a good banker, a good CPA, and a good attorney, right? If you're a business owner, if you can have, those type of contacts, I think that is paramount. So, my client was able to go to bed that night knowing that he wasn't ripped off for $4,000.
Yeah, because what's good about that is it might be difficult, even though we talked a lot about all the different frauds, and you want to be hyper vigilant and diligent and really paying attention to stuff. But we don't have all the answers. We can't necessarily always, like, if it happened to us, most of the time we wouldn't know what to do. Right. So what's nice is it would be nice to be able to see it quickly, as you're encouraging everybody. Make sure you see your finances going in and out on a regular basis, and then have someone you can call that can get answers and take action very quickly.
Right.
Because honestly, before we sat down today, if I saw something like that, I would be in a panic. I wouldn't know what I'm supposed to do.
Right.
And I've had experiences in the past. Some financial institutions are quick. Some are slow, and like you mentioned about that 24-hour window, if you don't take action quickly, that ship may sail. Yeah, and then you're SOL, right? Right,
you're out of luck, and most of the time the bank is going to back that up, and it's going to be your loss. You're going to incur.
Let's go back to that, if you can speak into it. So you mentioned that it was more common in the past I'm not quoting you, but what I heard is that financial institutions aren't as willing as they used to be to refund those types of activities. Is that because it's just too costly for them because it's happening so often?
Well, think about it, right? You're a business owner, right? Would you just want to have open exposure? You have no idea what that exposure is, right? The only time I think banks are willing to eat something, right, eat a loss, is to save that relationship, right? So I think banks are less and less likely to eat that loss to save that relationship, because then you get finger pointing like, well, you should have stopped this, and it's like, the bank is not the bank's fault that check got whitewashed, and it's not a bank error, right? If there's a bank error, then the bank will own that and take that. But if it's not, that's not a bank error. Your business, you cannot operate your business at Element 212 if you just have this open risk of an indefinite amount of money. Right? And banks aren't going to, our margins aren't that great. We can't take, I know of a bank, it's not Star, but I know of a bank that wrote off $7 million last year in fraud losses that they ate. And they will not do that. I guarantee they're not, because they're in the process of notifying their clients that we have positive pay, and it's out here, it's a service available, and if you incur losses, it's essentially going to be on you, right? So banks are taking those steps to go a step further, educate clients. It's almost like a acknowledgement, like, hey, commercial client, here's fraud is on the rise, this is out there, please be diligent. Bank has this product, we encourage you to take advantage of that to limit your exposure to fraud, right? And if you incur losses, they could be on you.
Wow.
So you just can't operate a business having that open exposure. Like, we're going to cover all these losses for you.
How long have you, over the years you've been doing this, have you personally seen a spike in these fraudulent occurrences?
Yeah, I've been in banking, gosh, it's probably 11, 12 years, something like that. It's been.
What are some of the trends you're seeing now in fraud that you didn't see back then?
Just the sophistication of it. Like, we haven't talked much about ACH fraud. So,
I was going to get into that next, so thank you.
So here's a scenario that's really sneaky. So we hear about hacks all the time. Like, Ascension is a big thing in the news within the last month. Ascension,
like data breaches and things like that.
Right. They had a takeover where some criminals took over their system. Right. So. My daughter works there, and the medical records were all locked up, and the doctors couldn't see medication. So they were essentially flying blind, and the billing had to be done manually. So for the largest organizations in the United States, Ascension is a huge company, right? And they had a data breach, right? So we've seen Targets, just kind of going off memory, some huge national companies have all been breached, right? I think
Wells Fargo had one.
Wells Fargo.
I think Wells Fargo was one of the very first banks to really get exposed to that. That was some time ago, and they recovered from it, but they were kind of, the fraud wasn't as known. Those types of scams weren't as known back then, and I know they got hit hard.
Yeah. So when we talk about like hacks and stuff like that, so here's something that we're seeing on the ACH side. So you work with a vendor every month. Say maybe you're a paper company, right? And you order paper from ABC Paper Company every month, right? You get your monthly. So let's say a criminal hacks into the ABC Paper Company, right? And they hack in there and they see all the emails, and they see that Betty, right, from ABC Paper Company emails you every month. So Todd, here's your monthly invoice for all the paper you ordered for Element 212, right? So here's all your paper.
Okay.
So you get an email from Betty monthly, right? So you get it, and then what these criminals are doing, they're hacking into this company, and they're actually stealing the actual invoice that you're expecting to pay.
Okay.
Right. So they will steal an actual invoice.
They'll steal an invoice.
Right. They'll see the invoice.
Okay.
Right. And they see who sends the emails. So you'll get an email, and it looks like it's from Betty.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Gotcha.
So you'll get your email.
Oh, man.
But if you hover over the email, it's actually not Betty, but it'll say Betty Smith, ABC,
wow.
Right? If you actually would hover over it, you'd see some other email address, right? So the email looks like, there's
and when we talk about trends, that's one of the big ones, right? That's happening a lot.
Right. So they say, hey, Todd, here's the invoice this month. Oh, by the way, we've switched banks. right? Here's our new banking information. Send your ACH to this.
Oh my
right?
gosh.
So it's like, yep, okay, there's Betty sent her email.
So so in order for this transaction to happen, we both have to change our banking information. So you're sending.
Right. So then you're.
That's crazy.
And here's the bad thing about that scenario. Positive Pay won't catch that.
Oh.
Because you're authorizing that, right? If you're set up on ACH Positive Pay, ACH works the same way as check. You send your ACHs for the day, then you go on and you input those into the Positive Pay file and upload it to your online banking.
They can't, because they're not anticipating that one.
Well, you've authorized it, right? You've authorized that ACH. You're paying that invoice because Betty sent it to you, right? Like you do every month. You're sending it to the new bank account, which is the criminal's bank account.
So you're giving permission for them to take out whatever amount of money it is at whatever time that's going to be.
Right.
Wow.
Because they have compromised the paper company that you're working with.
That's incredible.
Right. So that's the one scenario where you can't, Positive Pay wouldn't catch that because you have authorized it. So you're going to upload that into your Positive Pay file that's a good ACH to pay, but it's not. So my advice there is to go back old school, right? So, and I'm not sure if you've sent a wire lately through your bank, but banks are calling to verify wires, right? So it's kind of like old school, like, okay, Todd, did you authorize to send this wire? They want to talk to the client, verify who you are, and that you're sending that wire, and you know where it's going to, that you're not being, it's not a fraudulent situation that you're encountering. So the banks will question on that. And sometimes clients get upset about that, but it's kind of like going old school. I can't stress this enough. If anyone learns anything out of this podcast today is that don't take an email for any type of verification to change any form of payment. If you're working with any vendors, clients, and you get an email to change a payment method, you need to call someone you trust at that company to verify. Because maybe ABC Paper Company did change your bank, right? That happens, right?
But that shouldn't be done through the internet.
Don't take an email.
Through digital exchange, yeah.
You need to pick up the phone and call them, right? 100% you have to do that. Because I've seen, that's a big one that they do it because think about it. It's an invoice you're expecting to pay. Yeah, I bought these materials for this dollar amount. Yeah, I'm going to pay it.
Have you noticed, is two-step authentication, is that really helping a lot with a lot of fraud?
That helps. A lot of people don't like it because it's
I do with all my stuff.
a little cumbersome. So I'm glad you do that. So it's one of the things I want to talk about today is that, dual authentication to get into your accounts. Because, and in fact, we quit using email as a second form of authentication to log in, right? So we did away with email.
Because you can capture someone's email.
Right. So the text message is typically and then you text in a code. And
yeah. So we're sending we're sending something fraudulent through email, and we want you to verify your email through email.
Right. So we quit doing that a year or so ago. That we quit using email.
You do a text.
Yeah. So yes, and you should do that. And another pain that people don't want to do is I would change your passwords on a regular basis.
Oh, I don't do that
Everyone
very well.
Is, right.
That part I don't do well. I must admit, I do two-step authentication on my banking, QuickBooks, pretty much on any account where there's an exchange of information or money. I do that.
You should.
How often should we be changing our passwords?
Well, I would say monthly, but
wow,
if you do it at least quarterly, that's better than never. Like most people don't do it, right? They get a kid's name and a little @1 or something like that.
Anniversary,
right? Anniversary,
birthday,
or summer 1 or happy 1 or whatever. But there's programs out there that I have a client that works in the cybersecurity field, and he said there's software out there where they just recreate passwords and constant attack and trying to get these most common passwords used across the world, essentially, right? And that's how these criminals hack into.
Yeah, they're going to do it based on the percentages,
right?
So they're going to keep trying, and eventually that one's going to hit,
right? Because it's just a computer program; it just runs, right? So
that's wild. So that's where AI could be a little dangerous. Is it can outthink us, or or think like us and
Right.
and know how we think, and they're going to look at birthdays and all those key
Right.
dates and things like that.
Right, all that information's out there on your social media. They go, oh, look at here's their kids' names and here's their dogs' names and the typical passwords people use, and all this stuff is out there available. And you got to think when they have these programs running 24/7, they're not sleeping, right? They're just hacking this, putting this stuff in a computer, and this is constantly trying to get into your account.
It's incredible.
So, yeah, dual verification, extremely important. Changing your password, and nothing like common, just odd letters that don't go to not necessarily words, and numeric and asterisks and exclamation marks and number signs and anything you could do to change it up, which is a huge pain for everybody because every service you sign into, you got to have a password. It's like you can only handle so much, right?
Okay. Wow. That's really interesting. Okay. You've shared, I'm sure in some of the information you've shared, you've indirectly provided some examples. Your examples probably were personal experiences you had. But if you don't mind, everyone loves a story. Can you walk us through, of course, we're not going to share any names of companies or individuals, but can you just walk us through a more recent scenario where fraud, maybe one of your clients or someone something happened, some fraudulent activity, what that whole process looked like, and how it was resolved maybe in a positive way? How were they were okay on the back end? They learned from it. They put those things in place, and now they're preventing it going forward.
Right. So, a recent example is kind of one of the first things we talked about is like internal fraud, right? Where
you saw that you've seen that.
Oh, I've certainly seen that where they had someone like a CFO for the company.
Okay.
Had some issues, and this was a trusted person, and I kind of talked about earlier, just trust and.
What was the red flag? What did they see?
They started seeing like the cash flow wasn't there like they were expecting, right? So when they were looking at their reports, like why don't
so cash flow was going down?
Cash flow is going down,
and they're thinking just based on the growth they were experiencing, and they were expecting it to go up.
Right, and this person was stealing cash out of the business and stole probably a couple $100,000 out of the business.
How do they do that? Tell me, do you know how they were able to do that?
Yeah, but they had access to the checking account.
Correct.
Right, so they were a signer on the checking account.
Okay.
So that's another thing too. Is like be careful who you give authority to.
Yeah, but that's like but that's crazy because that's in plain sight. So if you do that, right, you're doing that. All that has to happen is for the person who is responsible for those finances, like an owner or whatever, to see that. So are they no pun intended banking on you not seeing that?
Essentially, you got to think this. So this individual maybe had some gambling or some drug issues or something like that. So people aren't in the right frame of mind.
So their level of risk is also they're willing to take on that risk.
Taking that risk, right? So
okay.
So luckily, the owner and something else we haven't talked about today is like insurance for fraud.
Oh,
right?
really?
Right. So. I mean, there's not a lot of small businesses that can recover from a couple $100,000 loss, right? Usually that's a killer.
Oh, that would put a lot of us out of business.
Right. So they had insurance. So if you're a business owner, I'm assuming your insurance agent has already talked to you about like cybersecurity fraud.
Nope.
Yeah, should. You should have that conversation.
That's good. We're doing this podcast episode is supposed to be for the benefit of the listener. I'm learning a lot today.
Yeah, you should have.
I don't have any kind of fraud insurance.
Yeah. Right. So that saved them because they had fraud insurance and got some of those losses recouped.
Do you encourage a lot of your clients to get fraud insurance?
Oh, 100%.
So how did that play out? So the CFO was tampering with the finances. How were they caught, and how was it? What was the action taken? How was it resolved?
Well, they were prosecuted, right? That's theft. So they got caught and prosecuted. So I'm not sure what actually happened with the individual.
With the business, how badly was the business hit?
Well, not as bad because they had the insurance to cover. It wasn't like 100% of the losses, but they recovered, I think, 75, 80%, something like that. So the policy covered quite a bit of that.
Does insurance fraud can it sometimes cover 100%, or is it typically 75 to 80?
That I don't know. I'm not an insurance expert, but I would certainly maybe later today have a conversation with your insurance agent to find out what types of. I'm sure. I mean, there's different levels of coverage that you can buy.
Is that something you mention to clients as well?
Yeah, right. Well, when I talk to clients, I talk the whole spectrum. I talk about the fraud. I talk about who their CPA is, right? Like who their insurance agent is. I kind of cover the whole gamut because I want to know not only about the business, but then who they're working with, right? Are they happy where they're at? Because I have contacts in the CPA world, insurance world, stuff like that, where I can direct them to people that I trust, right? So I try to be a trusted advisor, like to be more than just, hey, handle my checking account, or I need a loan, right? I need to be someone that the client can feel comfortable going to, say, I have an issue with X, and do you have anyone that you would recommend? So I try to cover the whole gamut, and I think most good bankers that I know do that. I've learned from watching others. There's no magic pill out there, but I've been in banking long enough I've been around some very good bankers and see how they operate them, and I just plagiarize off them essentially. But that's why it's so important to have a good banker, someone you can go to that on the commercial side. If you just don't have that well-rounded person to be that trusted advisor, it just, I've helped clients. The money markets are paying great rates now, and I see clients with a bunch of money sitting in their checking account, like, it's earning some interest on a checking account, but like, hey, why don't you move some of that to a wealth account that's earning 5% on the money market? I had one client earn several $100,000 because they moved it from their checking account to a wealth account. So
you're the first someone in the banking world that I've ever talked to that has mentioned fraud. What was it that led to you to take such a proactive approach? Where did your passion come from? There's a lot we can talk to our clients about. It's not technically your job. You're obviously you're going above and beyond, and you're adding value. You're protecting your client's interest. You're also, in a way, protecting the bank's interest as well.
Right.
But what happened, or what were you seeing and experiencing that made you go, wow, this is something I need to make a top priority to mention to my clients going forward? What happened?
That's an easy question to answer, because I don't want to be the guy receiving a phone call from an angry client that had fraud, they've incurred fraud, and then I say, oh, we have these products called Positive Pay. I don't want to be that guy, right? To say, I'm letting everyone know up front, we have this is a huge risk for you, for any business. So I just didn't want to put myself in a position to be in front of a client that I like working with, and I'm happy to have them as a client of the bank, and then they incur fraud, and then I present, oh, we have Positive Pay that they don't know anything about.
Why the heck didn't you tell me about that?
I don't want to be that guy.
You son of a...
Right. So I didn't necessarily have an event. I just saw that fraud. This was a few years ago, right? When I've learned and I've grown as a banker, and I've just seen fraud, and I'm like, I just don't want to be in front of a client, right, that trusts me, right? Trust me with their money and advice, and have that conversation, because to me that's a no-win conversation to have with a client.
You might not be an expert. Again, we talked about a lot of scams. Cybersecurity is one of them, but we all do a lot of business on our computers, and we use our company email. Not assuming you're an expert in this area, but do you have any knowledge? What you mentioned about the Positive Pay, the insurance. We covered a lot of things that are happening and things to be looking out for. What are some things culturally, internally? We talk about what the owner can do, but what can businesses do with their teams and their leaders to also prevent, how do you talk about fraud? What's the best way to make it top of mind, to educate your team on be looking for these things? Because it can happen at home, it can happen at work.
Yes.
A lot of times we're on our work computer. So what's some advice you would give an owner to make fraud top of mind, an important topic that everyone's aware of, everyone's talking about, everyone is looking for?
Internal controls. You have to have good internal controls with your company, right? So a phishing email. We've all got phishing emails before, right? I'm not sure. I know we've talked about some of your IT guys that work on your stuff here, but you should have, if you get an email from outside the company with an attachment, like at Starbank, with their yellow flag, like this email came from outside the company.
Yeah.
We get phishing emails at the
see
bank.
a lot of that,
I get these phishing emails that it looks like it could be from our CEO, right? But I see it's a yellow flag, so the bank does a good job helping us, right, identify those emails that come from outside the company, right? Because if you just look at it, it could look like an internal email, but it's not, right? And it has a link on there.
I mean, heck, I get emails from my own team members. I got an email just the other day where the email looked like it was coming from one of my own team members. And I'm like, how dumb is that? Literally asking me for private information. I'm like, that's crazy. But, I mean, you would think that would be obvious to catch, but it must work.
Right. Well, I think they're sending it. I mean, they're sending out thousands of these.
This is all automated.
They just need 1 or 2 hits.
That's it.
It's all automated.
Wow.
Right? So it's not somebody just clicking each email. Here's the one to Todd. Here's one to Greg. It's a bot sending out thousands, millions of these emails across the country. So they're trying to get a few hits, and that's all they need.
One of the other things I've seen companies, the financial institutions are really on top of this, but I'm even seeing non-financial companies where if they have something set up where if they don't recognize your email address, like they won't even, they'll just block it, just blocked. I've sent emails to people that I know, but the person on the other end forgot to put my email into their database, and because my email was not recognized,
I went to their junk email or something like that.
Your message was blocked.
I've had a few of those that have funneled to the junk, and I've had to work with our IT because I think companies, I think you're better off being more strict than not strict, right? So you as a business owner, I would look at your own, what are you doing internally, controls, right? So phishing emails, what can you do? Can you work with your IT staff to help your staff identify emails coming in from outside the company? Anything with a link in there, you need to have make sure staff know, like, it's got to be it's going to be a valid email before you click on any link. That's the best advice I could say, is just having good, strong internal controls to protect you, because once they, a phishing email, they click a link, they're into your system, right? In your system, they get into your online banking, they can get on all kinds of things.
Have you had any clients that got into that ransomware stuff? Because they'll go after small companies too.
Oh yeah,
because like you pointed out, you think it's the big companies, right? Because they have more money. But if you're a small company, imagine. I mean, you're put in a really bad spot because you can be out of business so quickly. Either way, like if you don't meet their demands, they can put you out of business, and if you have to give them the money, that could put you out of business.
Right.
I mean, that ransomware is really scary.
Yeah, and I think that's what happened to Ascension. I think it was a ransomware situation that they just had. Like, they held them hostage. They held all their data. So luckily, I haven't had any of my clients experience ransomware. So I'm sure I will. It will happen. As sure as I'm sitting in front of you.
Not if you keep doing what you're doing. I don't think so.
Well, you just need to be diligent. You have to be diligent. If anything else gets through to anybody today, is to look at internal controls, contact your bank. I would recommend getting positive pay. Do everything you can to protect yourself. Talk to your insurance agent about getting some type of fraud policy.
Okay.
And I'm assuming there's different levels. Like, I'm sure there's a policy for ransomware, right? There's probably there's probably internal fraud policy, and then there's probably a cybersecurity. So you may have to buy 3 policies, but will help you sleep at night and help your maintain your business, because it just takes one incident and it could bring a business to its knees.
That's a whole other conversation, because I look at technology and there's a lot of blessing through technology. It's created some kind of conveniences and some benefits, but I look at all the things from if you look at where people spent their money 20, 30 years ago versus now, they pay so much into these things. Like there's so many things to spend on, and like you said, now we have to spend even more money just to prevent people from taking our money.
Right.
And it's just horrible. You have people out there working their butts off every day, running businesses, working hard, trying to earn that money, and someone internally or externally in a matter of seconds can take it from you.
Yeah.
It's mind-blowing. It's just mind-blowing.
And they're really good at it, and they're going to get better. It's just going to get worse. That's my only forecasts. They'll get better. They'll get more divisive on trying to get into your accounts and get your money. So you need to do everything you can to build a fort around your business, your money, your bank accounts, right? Like, do everything you can to protect yourself.
Yeah. One of the things I didn't tell you, Greg, is we have on every podcast, I have one final thing to discuss with you, but I do a dad joke segment.
Oh, okay.
I'm big on dad jokes. Yeah. I do them all the time. I'm known for them. Puns, play on words. Didn't say I was good at them. I just love them.
You just like them.
I do.
Yeah.
So some of my team members, I was actually very touched. They're like, you should do a dad joke segment. So what I do, Greg, is it's for the benefit of the audience. I mean, you can benefit from it too, but I ask a question. It's rhetorical because I'm not looking for an answer. So if you know the answer to it, don't say it.
Okay.
So what we do is we do the podcast, and then when the podcast posts on our Facebook page is the dad joke question and answer. Just a little fun thing.
Yeah.
The only downside to the whole thing is that there's a picture of me on there, but it's like that. It's only my head, like not my neck. So all you see is my head. I'm like, can we get a different picture up there?
Yeah.
So here's the dad joke. What do you call a fish wearing a bow tie? What do you call a fish wearing a bow tie? So ponder that, think about that. And when this podcast with Greg posts, go to our Facebook page and you'll get the answer to what do you call a fish wearing a bow tie?
Yeah, I'm curious.
I'll share it with you when we're done.
Sure, yeah.
No, you know what? I might make you wait until it's on the Facebook.
Make me wait.
Yeah. So I love this one. It's cute. This is one of the ones where whether you're a kid or an adult, you're going to love it.
Yeah, I'll probably like, oh, yeah.
Yeah. So listen, everything we've talked about today could benefit all businesses. Obviously, the focus of our podcast is family businesses. And there is a slight difference with just a slight, maybe it's factual, maybe it's just opinion, but family businesses, more so than any other type of business, regardless of size, they care so passionately about their legacy, right? They want to see their businesses thrive for years to come, generations to come. They put so much into their business to be able to protect and give back to their employees and their community. It's just something that's just very dear to them. So as we're talking through this, again, everything today could be for anybody, but especially if you're a family business, which probably makes sense if you're watching this podcast, your customers are your assets. Your employees are your assets, not just your money. Mm-hmm. So really do a lot of the things that we've been talking about today. I've learned a lot, Greg. Thank you so much for these insights. I know this would be a 3-hour podcast if we were to go through every single type of scam. What I thought was good is you gave a lot of ideas, a lot of insights into what's happening. And regardless of the type of scam, I think a lot of what you shared kind of covers all of those in terms of prevention. And I love some of the ideas you mentioned about positive pay and the insurance and just things to be looking out for. So if you are a family business owner or a family leader and there's something you can do to prevent fraud in your company, do it, because God forbid something were to happen, then all of a sudden you might be out of business and all those people you care about no longer have a job.
Right.
You won't be able to provide that high level quality of service and product that your communities look out for. You won't have money anymore to give back to the local schools or the local, things like that. So I've learned a lot. Take this information very, very seriously. Contact your relationship manager at your bank. Reach out to Greg personally. Take this very seriously. Banking is more than just writing checks and paying bills and making money. It's about protecting those assets. And I think this topic of fraud is extremely important because everything we've worked for can be taken away in a heartbeat.
Yes.
It's really serious. It's a very serious thing.
Sad but true.
Sad but true. Okay. Well, to learn more about Greg Bramwell, Bramwell, just go to LinkedIn. I think if you put in Greg Bramwell on LinkedIn, I think you're the only guy.
I think I'm one of one.
One of one. Wow, man, you're special.
Right.
I can't believe there aren't more.
I tell my boss that all the time, but he doesn't believe me. So.
Well, what about your wife? Does she believe you?
Rarely.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the people that care about you the most, they're not gonna want to
Right,
they're not
right.
gonna want to lift you up.
Right.
They're gonna lift you up enough that you have
Enough.
self-esteem, but
Right.
not too much that
Not too
you're
much.
big. Your head gets
Right,
too big.
Right. They keep me grounded.
Yeah, the people that love us will never tell us how great they really think we are.
Right,
Got to
right.
balance that out. So
They're good at pointing out our flaws, though.
yeah. And to learn more, and I do want to cover this too. I do want to give a plug to the company you work for. So, if you want to learn more about, the topics we talked about today, security and fraud, you can go to starfinancial.com/security. starfinancial.com/security. And what I noticed, Greg, that was really cool was as we were talking through the subject, I actually saw this and I was like, how cool is this? We're talking about this. You clearly work for a company that also puts a lot of time and attention into this important topic.
Yeah. Yep.
And I love that. So I'm not going to run through all of it, but just go to starfinancial.com/security. And there's a lot of stuff here that'll help you as an individual and as a business owner. And I recommend that you go through this, click on the links, learn more about it. And again, Greg, if someone did want to contact you directly, should they just go on LinkedIn and send you a message, or is there another way to reach you if they want to talk about this?
They could. LinkedIn's a possibility. They could actually. There's on the website itself on commercial banking. They can find me on the website.
Okay.
So there's my email address and phone number on commercial banking. So.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. I think I tell you, what's interesting, Greg. You're the first person I've ever had a podcast interview with where I asked very few of my questions, and the reason why is that you just did a great job of just covering everything. So they're like, I had like 12 to 11 questions. I think I only asked like 2.
Yeah.
Because you just gave all the information.
Well, there's
I love it.
We talk about this a lot. I know you and I meet on a monthly basis, and it seemed like most of our conversation we end up talking about fraud at one point during our conversation. So it is important to me. It's important that I do everything I can to protect my clients and protect the bank, and try to avoid those scenarios where I'm sitting across from a client and they're looking at me and I'm looking at them and they're pointing their fingers. I just want to avoid that at all costs. And it's just a little due diligence you have to do on your side as a business owner, just like anything else, just to make sure you're protecting your asset. Right. So, we will work with you and do everything. And I've seen us help clients that, that didn't have positive pay but they notified us within the 24 hours. And we have a great treasury team and great fraud team at Star. I know all those individuals. And unfortunately, I probably know them too well because I've had to talk to them and say, hey, this happened. What can we do? But working with a smaller community bank and so all these folks, we all know each other, right? So you're working. I never worked at a large bank like a PNC or Chase. I'm not sure how that works there, but I imagine the fraud teams maybe in New York right. But everyone here is here. They're in Central Indiana.
It's really
right?
cool.
So I know them. I can contact them. We're just more nimble in getting that resolved.
One or 2 degrees of separation. You got it taken care of.
Right. You're right. So I'm not calling an 800 number, and so you're when I guess biggest advice I can say is work with a banker that you have their number, someone you can contact. And
I would say that really has a knowledge that you have and really takes it very seriously.
Yeah.
Because if I feel like if your relationship manager or whatever title they may have, whoever your contact is, if they're not, what I've learned from this is if they're not asking you or talking about fraud, the question has to be why. Why are we not having this conversation? Cool. Well, I just want to thank our audience for listening to and watching this episode of Up in Your Family Business podcast. The goal and purpose of this podcast, through the help of our guests like Greg, are to help family businesses solve problems, seize opportunities, and achieve multi-generational prosperity. What I mean by that is we want to see family businesses survive and thrive and grow. Family businesses are great for our communities, and I personally just feel an inside pain when a family business goes out of business or a family business sells to a larger conglomerate. It's just so painful. So we're big advocates. Our guests are big advocates of family business. We are as well, and we hope that this podcast episode has been helpful and informative and insightful for you. If you do like this one, I encourage you to check some other ones that we've done in the past where you found this one. And of course, be looking for the next one, which will be coming very soon. So again, Greg, thank you for being here, talking about this very important subject. This was bigger and better than I even imagined, because there were things, even though I did my research, there were things that you brought to the table, that you introduced, that I wasn't aware of. So thank you very, very much for sharing your expertise, your passion, and the care that you have for your clients.
I appreciate the invitation and enjoyed meeting with you this morning.
Thank you.